Going now into the second half of our interview with Victor Teisch about his joining the Communist Party. In the first program, he told us why he joined in 1936. It was the time of the Depression. There was tremendous unemployment and almost no benefits, and how he became a organizer in a factory in Queens and Long Island City. And he has a little more to say about that period in the 1930s before we come more up to date. Okay, Vic, go ahead.
I want to go back to that period because it was such an intense experience, and the condition of the country was so terrible that I simply have to emphasize that again. But in addition to what I've already told you about, remember that in the South, the African Americans, we called them Negroes at that time, the African Americans were terribly oppressed. And a very good example of that was an event known as the Scottsboro Boys. In 1931, in Scottsboro, Alabama, 9 black boys, and I say boys advisedly because they were not men, 9 black boys were riding the rails, as were millions of other young white and black people, because of the terrible unemployment, going desperately from city to city, state to state, looking for any way to make a buck. And these 9 were arrested and charged with raping 2 female riders on the train. And it was Scottsboro, Alabama. They were arraigned and they were tried, one after the other, 1 hour apiece, and 8 of the 9 were sentenced to death. Well, at this point, the Communist Party stepped in. Nobody else had touched it. The Communist Party began a campaign of publicity about what was going on with these 9 boys, and the Communist Party raised such an understanding of what a criminal act this was on the part of the authorities of Scottsboro, Alabama, that after years of fighting this and supplying lawyers and keeping these 9 going and keeping them alive, it went twice to the Supreme Court, and finally, none of them were executed. 8 of them were, again, they were sentenced to prison terms, too long prison terms, because they were innocent. But all their lives were saved, and they were sentenced to like 8 years to 16 years of prison. I forget the exact figures. And I tell this story because this is at the same time in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union at this point seemed to be a place where ethnic barriers had been done away with, anti-Semitism had been done away with. Paul Robeson, an internationally famous actor and singer, he would go to the Soviet Union very often, and he would come back with glowing reports of the wonderful things that were going on there. So in addition to the just plain horrors of the Depression, there was still, in addition to that, the particularly oppressed conditions for
Of course, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. You had the doctors' plot where Stalin said, or Beria said, Jewish doctors were trying to assassinate Stalin, and that sort of thing happened after the war. So, I mean, the reality certainly was quite different.
You're preempting me.
I'm presenting some history along with you, Vic.
Because
you mean you were about to talk about it?
Yeah, I was about.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
In 1956, Khrushchev made a speech to the Congress of the Russian Communist Party, I guess the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the entire Communist Party of that vast country. And in this 1956 speech, he did something that was absolutely incredible. He denounced Stalin, and Khrushchev revealed that during the periods of Stalin's reign, and we have to call it a reign because it turns out that Stalin was a dictator, a dictator with all of the evil that you can attach to the name dictator, and it included a whole host of oppressive measures that were pretty bad. Now, I again want to emphasize that this was only part of the picture, because really the Soviet Union did accomplish a great deal in terms of the welfare of the people, in terms of jobs, housing, education, healthcare, and so on and so on. But there was this stain that Khrushchev revealed, and this caused me to. I had to do some thinking at this point, because I was now 45 years old. I had devoted many, many years to what I thought was a great cause, and I still thought it was a great cause, and I still think it was a great cause, but I felt that maybe they could get along without me for a while. And I then used my education, and I became a high school teacher. And in 1962.
And what did you teach?
I taught English. I was an English teacher in New York, in a Queens high school, and that's where I spent the next phase of my working life. Of course, it was not easy for me to give up the factory. It was not easy for me to give up. I had to say to myself, okay, you've done good up until now, but you can knock it off for a while.
Well, it must have been a severe blow to a lot of people to learn from Khrushchev's speech what had really been going on. It was a very devastating thing to hear.
Yeah, it was a devastating thing to hear.
Yeah.
I guess there's one thing I should add, since you are bringing that up. A lot of people, based on Khrushchev's revelations, denounced the Communist Party. I didn't, and I still don't. I didn't denounce the Communist Party then, and I don't denounce them now, because the idea of communism is still valid. So you have to ask yourself, if it was so valid, why didn't it work?
Well, why?
It didn't work. I remember when I was very involved at the height of my passion with the red flag, leading the parade with waving the red flag. People would say to me, it's not going to work because you can't change human nature. And I would argue with people, say, if you show people that you can have a society, a socialist society, in which there are no very rich and no very poor, and everybody is working for the common good, and everything is owned in the name of all of the people, I said, this will change human nature. People will understand that that's better for them than what they have now, capitalism. And finally, in 1956, 57, 58, 59, this went through my head until 1962, and I finally decided. I finally accepted that, unfortunately, humans have not evolved to the point where they understand that socialism is better than capitalism. Capitalism is a cruel and corrupting system. It's based on the proposition that everybody's for himself, and may the devil take the hindmost. And if in climbing the ladder you step on the guy's fingers who's on the rung below you, why, that's perfectly okay. And it allows itself into the kinds of excesses that we saw in 1929. In fact, as you probably know, there are recessions every 10 or 12 years, because that's the way capitalism works. And sometimes these recessions are depressions, and they are very costly to people. And so okay. So what should we do? I'll tell you what we got to do. we're going to have a continuing class struggle, just like Karl Marx said. There are going to be that group of people who do not own the means of production, the mines and the factories and the mills, and there are going to be those who do own the mines, factories, and mills. And there's going to be a conflict between them, because the ones who own these factories and mines and mills are going to do their best to exact every bit of sweat and every muscle that a worker has to produce, so that there'll be more profit and stocks will go up. But meanwhile, the worker has to protect himself and herself. So there has to be unions and people's organizations that take them on. Let me point out, for example, that there was a great middle class developed in this country in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It became not unusual for a factory worker to buy a house and for his wife to stay home, not work, and for the factory worker to buy a house and have a car. And this was because he belonged to one of the great industrial unions that had that as a result of the unionization have been able to get wages that were genuine living wages, where you could have a middle class life. There was one other thing that made that possible, and I want to give that credit also, and that is that the GI Bill of Rights also is very important. For those of you who don't know what it was, any veteran who served in World War II was entitled to go to college on the house, paid for by the government, and that also helped to raise a middle class.
Yes, I went to college on the GI Bill of Rights, absolutely.
But the point I want to make is that in addition to that GI Bill of Rights, the mass industrial unions and the pay that they got and the conditions they got made it possible to have an American middle class. And in 1980, when Reagan was elected, he began a careful campaign to destroy the unions by calling them corrupt, and by doing everything in his power to, and he succeeded. The unions that used to have close to 40% of the workers in the country are now down to like maybe 7%. I don't know the exact percentage.
What were you doing around that time? You were a high school teacher.
You were
teaching in the high school. What were those years in your life where you taught in high school?
Well, I was a loyal member of the United Federation of Teachers. I supported all of their activities, and I supported any movement that I thought was in keeping with improving the conditions of life for people, not only in this country, but anywhere in the world. For example, during those years, I guess I was involved in this terrible business that was going on in Central America, where the United States, where the banana companies, supported by our government, were exploiting the people of Central America terribly, and they always had a corrupt government in there that would play ball with the politicians, with the fruit companies and other companies that were exploiting down there. I'm talking about Guatemala and Nicaragua and El Salvador and Honduras. In fact, even right today, Honduras had an elected president who was overthrown in a coup. And there's a big movement, there's a certain movement in the United States to help the elected president get back into office. But there's a story in today's Times how there's a very powerful group in Congress that doesn't want him to get back in there, because they like the new guy who pulled off the coup, because he's more in line with what the American corporations down there want.
Well, maybe we should have had a campaign to get Gore back in office in 2000.
That would have been a good idea.
Yeah.
So that's what
Well, is there still a communist? I know there's still a communist party. Is it still active?
Oh, let me tell you about that. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's about my age, a woman. Her name is Beatrice Lumpkin. She's married to a man named Frank Lumpkin, who had a good career as a trade unionist. And Beatrice, who lives in Chicago, is still a member of the Communist Party, of the American Communist Party. And she, of course, would love to re-recruit me. But I will not be re-recruited because it's not working.
Right.
So I'm for sticking to the class struggle, build the unions, build the people's organizations, and take away from the capitalist class, that cruel bunch, the ability to make us suffer the way we do.
How do you feel fighting the capitalists and being a resident of East Hampton?
My answer to that is very simple. My answer, I've always said this: nothing's too good for the working class. Whatever you can accomplish in your life.
Yeah, right.
But I never did it.
I mean, as a communist or former communist or whatever it is, when you walk down Main Street in the middle of August and you have people multitasking and carrying a baby in one arm and 7 packages in another, all from one store more expensive than the next, what do you feel? They're not the working classes, right?
Well, they're not, and I'm quite aware of it.
Yeah.
And I would like it much better if we didn't have these filthy, obscenely rich people who come out here. Yeah. And I would like it better if we didn't have millions in poverty and starvation. And that's why I keep on saying we gotta squeeze those two ends together.
Yeah.
And that's. I'm still very involved in social issues, and in fact, the 3 documentaries that I did, after the history of East Hampton, the one that I did 2 essentially on the death penalty, and 1 on drug addiction, which of course afflicts everybody, but especially poor urban youth are afflicted with it. Although by now it's all over the country, including the rural areas. So I'm still very active in that kind of activity. So have we run out of stuff to talk about?
What's that?
Have we run out of stuff to talk about?
Oh, not at all. We run out of stuff to talk about. I'm sure you haven't. So there still is a Communist Party in the United States?
Yeah, they have meetings, they have a general secretary, and they have conventions, and they do try to build organizations to strengthen the unions and to strengthen other agencies, other organizations that will help to improve conditions. They're still doing that.
Well, one thing that concerned me about the communists, I agree with an awful lot of what you're saying, but the absence of freedom of speech is something that just kept me away from becoming a part of that. That we couldn't have a program like this. Right, we're a little station in a small town, but we can come in here and talk about whatever we like, and you couldn't do that in the Soviet Union or even in Cuba. Did you have any feelings about that?
We in the American Communist Party were very fortunate. We were busy building unions. We were busy building organizations to get better conditions for the people. We were able to have we had no difficulty with freedom of speech. We had no sense of being oppressed or stopped by anybody. We were lucky. We were lucky because we had not yet seized power. Now, maybe if we had seized power, that would have ended. But we really, it was a wide open democratic organization. And I never had a moment's concern about that. It was always, well, I'm repeating myself now.
Yeah.
It was a wide open organization, very close ties with each other. My best friends today still, friends from 70 and more years ago, are from those days in the Communist Party.
Now you became a teacher. Didn't they try to stop members of the Communist Party or former members from becoming teachers?
Well, what happened was that I was followed around by the FBI constantly. I kept 2 FBI agents employed. Without me, they would have been unemployed, those poor guys. So I'm happy that I provided them.
You ever have lunch with them? Or?
No, I used to argue with them on the street corner. But in 1958, I was subpoenaed to come before the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee on communist activity. And you go down there and you get sworn in, and then you have to take the Fifth Amendment, because if they ask you, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, and you answer that, even if you want to answer it, and I was ready to answer it, yes, but if you answer any question, you lose your the protection, and then they can ask you, well, give us the names of the people who are working with you in the Communist Party. And they would then try to use you as an agent to further their terrible designs. And consequently, I took the Fifth Amendment. I had a lawyer with me, of course. I took the Fifth Amendment some 28 or 42 times, I forget what. And when I finally got a job as a teacher in 1962, I was on the job for about a month when I was sent for by the New York City Board of Examiners. And 3 men, the head of the Board of Examiners of the Board of Education of New York City, and 2 others, 3 officials of the Board of Examiners, and they had a sheaf of papers in front of them like that. And did you sign a petition for so-and-so for governor on the Communist Party ticket in 1938? I don't remember. They were going through a play acting game, really. And this went on for an hour.
In front of the Senate committee?
No, I'm talking now about the
Board of Examiners. Right,
Board of Examiners.
Right.
And after they went on and on and on and on and on, they were getting more and more, all the nefarious things I had done. Finally, I said, I've wanted to be a teacher. I got an education to be a teacher. I am now teaching in a Harlem junior high school, a very difficult school. Shall I stop being a teacher there, or do you want me to continue being a teacher there? Let's
very
stop.
good, yeah.
And they sort of hemmed and hawed and said, well, we'll let you know. Well, they never did let me know, but they let me stay.
So you just went on being a teacher?
I went on being a teacher.
So how long did that happen? How long were you a teacher?
I was a teacher until 1982, and by that time, a wonderful thing had happened to me.
Until 1982?
Yeah. A wonderful thing had happened to me. In 1970, I came out to Greenport to visit a friend of mine who had a house in Greenport. And that was it. I fell in love with the East End. I fell in love, and I had to be out here.
Right.
And consequently, that's finally when I retired in 1982, I was living in Sag Harbor and so on.
Well, a lot of radicals moved out here. Didn't the head of the Communist Party live in Hampton Bays for a time? And...
Well, I pretty much lost track of the Communist Party officials after 1960. The last time I really had contact with the FBI was in 1960. I had gone to Vermont to visit a friend of mine, and I was thinking briefly of doing what he had done. He had moved to Vermont, and I was interviewed by the Burlington, Vermont Board of Education superintendent, and I left to go home, and my friend from Vermont called me and told me that after I left, FBI agents had come to his door, and what was I doing there? What's going on here?
And this was in the
It was in 1960. That was it. That was the last time I heard of them.
So they gave up on you.
So I really didn't. I had known. I knew I have friends out here who had been in the Communist Party, but I didn't really know who was in the leadership, or I didn't really follow that much.
Yeah. But I get the feeling that your life was enormously enriched by your being a part of this and by the effort you put out, and that you look back on it with great pride and satisfaction. That you're a part of this.
Well, before I joined the Communist Party, I joined the Young Communist League.
Mm-hmm.
I joined the Communist Party when I was approaching 20. I joined the Young Communist League when I was about 17. The Young Communist League motto was, "For life with a purpose, joined the Young Communist League. And in a sense, I have, I feel as though I've lived my life with a purpose. It's been costly. It was very costly to my family. Things were rough during those, especially during those years.
How was it costly? We have about a minute and a half left, but tell us how it was costly to your family.
Well, my wife also was very, very supportive, very involved in the Communist Party, a great believer in the Communist Party. And in a sense, we had 3 children, and we could have, and the pay in the factory was pretty good because of the union, but we could have done better for our 3 children.
Well, they seem pretty happy. I've met them all.
But,
and they certainly love you.
Yeah, they love me and I love them, but I feel as though my wife and I, we could have done better for them. So that's pretty much.
Well, I'm not so sure they'd say that.
Yeah, well, that's my feeling.
Yeah.
And in case anybody wants to join the Communist Party, well, I have the application card.
I'll leave them in the lobby.
I'll leave them in the lobby.
Okay. Vic, thank you so much.
You mean it's over already?
Well, we have a half a minute. And Vic Tice, who is a treasurer for the town of East Hampton and a wonderful friend, and I feel very honored he came here to talk about his experiences with the Communist Party and about his life and about his accomplishments, which still continue. He has just finished a documentary, and he's 93 years old, or 92, right?
No, I'll be 93 in 2 months.
I'm sorry.
I'm still 92.
Okay, all right. So thanks very much, Vic. It was lovely.
It was my pleasure.
Okay.